Hello everybody, Bella Malloy here, host of Seek Travel Ride, and welcome to another midweek episode where I am fueling your stoke for adventure travel. This week I have superfan Steve Cuthbertson, who's going to share all about his amazing journey from Romania back to the UK. And I love everything about this adventure, about the way that it started, what sparked the idea to do it, and how this big adventure actually grew from a small one, which in the moment became larger as well. But before we get to Steven's story, I want to shout out some responses from you, my fans, on Instagram. A few weeks ago on Instagram, I put out a question, which was for you to all tell me, what's a place that you have been to that has surprised you the most? And to tell me your answers. So I got a lot of responses here, so I'm going to try and shout out as many as I can. First is Oscar J. Donovan. Oscar, you were on a mega round-the-world journey there on your cargo bike, which is amazing in itself. But you have said it's always been the places that people have warned me about. Pakistan, China, Albania, Kenya, and Zimbabwe. Oh, there you go. So I wonder, what has surprised you about them though, Oscar? Has it been surprising in that it hasn't been what you've been told it is and it's been a counterpoint, or you've found it amazing there? I'd love to know a little bit deeper there too. Then I have Curious Pedals, Valu and Elvis. Valu, I interviewed you, about a year and a half ago on your first adventure, and you're in a pretty mega one now, this dynamic duo from Finland cycling from Alaska to Ushuaia. So you're in South America now. So you have said, firstly, the Pamirs. It's yet to be part of the monoculture of the world, and it's yet to be poisoned by TikTok and smartphones. And then you've also said, Sierra Madre Oriental in Mexico. Insane bikepacking. Oh, there we go. So the Pamirs and Mexico. I wonder though, Valu, and look, this podcast is so down the bike adventure algorithm, and I obviously interview people that are not your typical ones, but I just feel like the Pamirs are starting to get a lot more discovered. So maybe that, the time is running out for that. I then have Cycling Overland. You said Perito Moreno Glacier. I had no idea just how beautiful it was until I visited it, and it was worth the headwind. Oh, and you sent me through some photos, and it looked absolutely mega. Next, I have Velo Manuela, and you have said the Argentinian Pampa. I've heard some great things about Argentina, and I've seen images of people in the Pampa. It's a very, very unique landscape. I have hacker.bikepacker Harvey, Rebecca Gross's awesome partner. You two are, what a mega adventure you're both on, right? But you have said West Mongolia, the mountains and canyons that you'd never imagine in the land of endless steppes. Oh, I've seen the images of this, and I must admit, I didn't think of this type of landscape existing in Mongolia, because if I close my eyes and I think of Mongolia, what I think of is grassy plains, endless horizon, rocky rivers, maybe huge big storm clouds, but canyons and things like that I had never pictured until I'd seen them. Then I have Bee on Bike, Birgit. Birgit is from Germany, and she said the Coromandel in New Zealand. New Zealand is just a mega country, full stop, right? And then last but not least, I have Hurley_Nathan, and you have said the Basque Country. Oh, well, I 100% agree with you there, because that's somewhere where I have visited, and it has taken my breath away as well, Nathan. And can I just say, listeners, a huge shout out to Nathan, because he has just literally returned home from a massive round-the-world adventure. You have so many places where you were just immersed in those feelings of awe. And yeah, I love that it was the Basque Country, because not only has the Basque Country got amazing landscapes, it's also got some fantastic food. There you go, listeners. So what do you think? Places that took you by surprise. If you want to get in touch with me and let me know which places took you by surprise, hit me up and send me a direct message on Instagram. My account there is Seek Travel Ride. All right, now, listeners, it's time to now go to our feature for the day, which is Steve Cuthbertson, and he's going to transport us on his ride from Romania back to the UK.
Hello, I'm Steven Cuthbertson. I've been cycling for as long as I can remember, but first started cycling seriously when I was a teenager. I rode with a couple of local clubs and took part in time trials and Audax rides and even the occasional road race. As time passed, I learnt to drive and the cycling fell by the wayside. Fast forward about 25 years, and with an ever-increasing middle-age spread, I thought it was time to do something about it. So I bought myself a mountain bike from a friend and started riding. It wasn't long before I remembered that I do actually like cycling, so the cheap mountain bike was upgraded for something better. I started riding to work and back, which was about a 40-mile round trip at the time, riding in all weathers, rain, shine, ice and snow. I did sometimes wonder about the wisdom of doing this on one occasion where I found myself sliding down the road on my backside on sheet ice. I rode my first multi-day ride in 2014, where I concocted a series of challenges in order to raise money for Cancer Research UK, as my father had been diagnosed with esophageal cancer. First on the list was cycling to the start of the Tour de France, which in 2014 was in Leeds. As I'd ridden to the start, I thought it only right that I should ride to the finish too, in Paris, so I did. As a grand finale, I rode from Land's End to John O'Groats. Fast forward again to 2023, and while I had continued to ride my bike, I hadn't undertaken anything earth-shattering. But in the interim, I had adopted a Romanian Shepherd dog, a huge bundle of fluff called Stella. Stella had been rescued by a local charity called Amici, with kennels in Worcestershire, Immingham and Humberside, and a small village called Vișoara in Romania. Stella was abandoned at the edge of a forest, but had the fortune to be found by a veterinary student, who took her home and nursed her back to health. Amici stepped in to help rehome Stella, and after a shaky start, she ended up with me. Now, Amici, like many other rescues, often struggle to raise funds for their cause, so in an effort to give something back, I decided to undertake a sponsored bike ride from the kennels in Worcestershire to the kennels in Immingham, a distance of 160 miles. I planned to do this in one day, so I packed in a few long-distance Audax rides as training. Then I found myself standing outside the kennels at 5 a.m. one June morning. I was pretty confident that I could make the distance, but I had no idea how long it might take me. I set off, serenaded by the sound of barking dogs. The weather soon warmed up, and I made good progress, despite the northeasterly headwind that stayed with me through the day. I plotted a route that avoided main roads where possible, following lanes and cycle paths and even a section of the EuroVelo 12. With one eye on my Garmin and another on my Just Giving page, I stopped for lunch in Radcliffe-on-Trent, where I'd noticed that we'd just surpassed the £500 mark. During another piece to camera, with tongue-in-cheek, I said, if we get to £1,000, I'll ride back tomorrow. I hadn't actually considered how I was going to get back, but highest on the list was probably by train. Cycling back wasn't on the list at all. I finally rolled up at the gates of the Immingham Kennels at 7:30 p.m. after 14 hours in the saddle. We'd raised £761 for Amici, and I think I breathed a sigh of relief. I stayed the night with a relative nearby and awoke about 6 a.m. The first thing I did was look at my Just Giving page and, oh dear, £1,021. Not wanting to go back on my commitment, I hurriedly got dressed, ate breakfast and head back to the kennels. I left at about 7:30, and although I was still aching from the previous day's efforts, yesterday's headwind was today's tailwind, so initial progress was pretty good. Later in the day, it got fairly hot, with temperatures in the high 20s, and I started to feel it. Probably didn't eat or drink enough, and I definitely felt I'd bitten off more than I could chew. I pushed through, though, and finally arrived back at the Worcester Kennels at about 8 p.m. The final total was 320 miles in 2 days and £1,505 raised. Summing up afterwards, I made another disposable comment. Now, how far is it from Vișoara to Worcester? Well, it turns out that it's about 1,700 miles, so I mulled that figure around in my head for a while. If I could get 3 weeks off work, and if I could ride 100 miles a day, that would give me a few days contingency, which would also need to encompass getting to Vișoara in the first place. I presented my plans to Anne at Amici. "You're mad," she said. Putting that to one side, she arranged for the dog rescue van, colloquially named as the Happy Bus, to transport my touring bike to Vișoara. leaving me with only a collection of panniers to take with me at a later date. I flew from Birmingham to Cluj-Napoca on a Saturday afternoon, arriving at something like 2 a.m. local time, crashed in an Airbnb and then took the train from Cluj to Campiaturzi the following morning. The team from Amici Romania collected me from the station. We collected my bike from Dora's mum's house. Dora is the lady that runs the rescue in Romania. Then we went to the kennels in Vișoara, where I was met by Dora, Daniela, Joanna and Michaela. After a brief lunch of sandwiches and cake that had been liberated from a wedding the previous evening, and a tour of the kennels, 300 dogs, a cat and a donkey, I set off on my ride at about 3 p.m. I had spent quite a lot of time online plotting my route and planned on picking up the EuroVelo 6 somewhere in Hungary, then riding that all the way to Germany. I then planned to cut across to the EuroVelo 15 and ride down the Rhine all the way to the Hook of Holland. Ferry to Harwich and then Harwich to Worcester. That still left about 600 kilometres across Romania and Hungary unplanned, but I noticed that on OpenStreetMap there was a cycle route that followed the river Mureș all the way from Aiud to Arad, which would cover almost the first 300 miles, so I'd planned on following this. I'd broken my 1,700-mile trip down into 100-mile chunks, and I was going to try and ride one chunk a day. That didn't work out exactly as planned, as obviously starting at 3 p.m, there was no way I was going to ride 100 miles on the first day. I did manage to get to Aiud though, about 30 miles. The road was fantastic, because the A10 motorway has been built alongside the E81, and all the traffic is on the motorway, leaving the old road almost empty. I spent the night in a hotel in Aiud, but there was no breakfast, or rather there was breakfast, but not until 8 a.m, and I wanted to be long gone by then. I found the hotels in Romania to be very reasonably priced, and although I did take a tent, it just didn't seem worthwhile using it at this point. The food was also reasonable, although most of my diet consists of an Audax-style raid on petrol stations, so choice was sometimes a bit limited. The following day, I rode from Aiud to Lipova, which was my longest day, or 144 miles. Again, the roads were pretty good, although the cycle route did lead me through something more akin to a forestry track than a road at one point. I was a bit disappointed when I arrived at Lipova because I couldn't find any open restaurants, so I did another petrol station raid and ate in my room. The highlight of the day was definitely Alba Iulia, which is a beautiful city. I hope to return one day. Day 3 took me from Lipova to Szeged in Hungary, still following the river Mureș, although I didn't really see much of it until I crossed it at Mako. The Mureș joins the river Tisa at Szeged, which then flows on to the Danube. I remember it being very hot. I think my Garmin recorded 36 degrees at one point. Plus, it was pan-flat and utterly boring riding across the Hungarian plains past fields of maize all day. In Szeged, I was hosted by a Be Welcome host, Peter, which is a bit like warm showers. We went to a local restaurant and it was great to have a chat and a couple of beers. Day 4 was more Hungarian plain, but I forsook my planned route and decided to ride straight up the Route 5 towards Budapest, again assuming that the vast majority of traffic would be on the motorway, which it was, most of the way. As I got closer to Budapest, though, this changed quite dramatically, and on occasions I found myself on really busy roads that I undoubtedly shouldn't have been on as a cyclist. At one point I got passed on both sides by lorries, which scared the bejesus out of me. Shortly after that, I pulled over to the side of the road to re-evaluate my route and took to the side roads. The only problem was that some of the side roads were sandy, and that's where I had my only fall of the trip, but no damage done. Just after I turned off the main road, I found a stray dog. Unfortunately, there wasn't much I could do, but I sat and shared my biscuits and water with him for a while. It was getting pretty late as I rode into Budapest, and as I hadn't arranged anywhere to stay, or rather, none of my Be Welcome hosts had replied, but I knew the EV6 ran alongside the Danube past a hotel that I'd previously stayed in. So in my mind, I thought, I'll just stay there. I eventually picked up the signs for EuroVelo 6. It seemed to take forever for me to arrive at the hotel, and I thought I might have passed it. Eventually, I arrived and wheeled my dusty bike into the reception. I don't think I made a good initial impression, But when I mentioned what I was doing, that I'd stayed there before, they were very welcoming and gave me a good discount, free breakfast, and a room overlooking the Hungarian Parliament building, although the latter was wasted on me as I was asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow. I spent the next 5 days riding up the EuroVelo 6 from Budapest to Regensburg, which were mostly uneventful. That's not to say nothing happened, but the route is so well developed, especially in Austria and Germany, that it's hard to fault. I started to camp here too because the cost of some of the hotels was much more expensive than in Romania. It wasn't so easy finding somewhere to eat either, as it was late September and a lot of the cafes were closed. I had to buy supplies in supermarkets as and when I could. Some sections of the Danube are stunning though. The section between Linz and Passau springs to mind, and I passed a number of cyclists coming in the opposite direction who'd taken the cycling option from the river cruise. At Regensburg, I spent a night with a couple of Be Welcome hosts who were quite amused when I had an impromptu interview from BBC Hereford and Worcester while sitting on their sofa. Interview done, we walked into town and had a meal together before they went on to an open mic night, and I went back to their apartment to sleep. Regensburg is where I left the EuroVelo 6 because it heads southwest at this point, whereas I wanted to cut across to the EuroVelo 15, where I planned to join it at Mainz. The next 2 days were a bit of a shock to the system after the shallow terrain of the Mureș Valley and Danube, but I still clocked up 112 miles and stopped for the night in Rothenburg, which is a beautiful place. I stayed the night above a Chinese restaurant, which was at least cheap. It did involve carrying my bicycle up 2 flights of stairs though, as there was nowhere to store it. As I headed out to look for dinner, I met a lady hauling her bike up the stairs too. We discussed the cycle storage situation, and she inquired as to whether I'd requested permission. I hadn't, and neither had she, so we left it at that. I headed out to look for dinner, but everywhere was booked up, so I ended up back at the Chinese restaurant, which wasn't. Draw your own conclusions from that. I ended up dining with the German lady I'd met on the stairs, and we compared plans. Turns out that she'd ridden from Darmstadt, my destination, for the following day. Regensburg to Darmstadt was also a bit of a challenge. I'd neglected to tick Avoid Off-Road on my route planner, so after the third set of bumpy trails, I'd reverted to Google on my phone instead. This worked out okay, as I ended up riding a fair distance beside the River Main, which despite it being late September was still packed with tourists. The killer was the last hill from the main valley to the Rhine Valley. I could have continued along the Main through Frankfurt, but I had planned to meet an old colleague in Darmstadt, which unfortunately never happened. I did have an impromptu guide for the ride though to Darmstadt, as a young German cyclist saw me loaded up and offered to show me a better route to town. I was glad I took him up on his offer, as he led me through some of the parts that the RAF hadn't bombed during the war. The following day I set off towards Mainz, or at least I thought I did. My route didn't start until Mainz, but my Garmin helpfully offered to navigate to the start of route. What could possibly go wrong? 2 hours later I arrived in Worms, 25 miles to the southwest of Darmstadt, instead of Mainz, 25 miles northwest of Darmstadt. This annoying detour added another 30 miles to my day and set my schedule back somewhat. I drowned my sorries in the central square before setting off north along the Rhine. Again, the EV15 is so well developed that it had no surprises in store for me. I enjoyed the Rhine Gorge UNESCO World Heritage Site through to Koblenz. From Bonn and beyond, the EV15 becomes, well, dare I say it, a bit boring. I passed quickly through Cologne, where I had also been earlier during the summer, and was heading for Dusseldorf when the heavens opened. I'd been pretty lucky with the weather, with rain leaving Lipova, but nothing since. I hid under a bridge next to the huge Bayer chemical factory, donned my waterproofs and continued. But the rain got heavier and heavier, so I decided enough was enough and booked myself into a hotel in a place called Dormagen, south of Dusseldorf. The following morning was a lot brighter, and I set off bright and early, hoping to reach Arnhem, which would then leave a day's ride to the ferry at Hook of Holland. The ferry didn't sail until something like 10 p.m, so I couldn't see anything stopping me from making it. I booked the ferry for the following day. From Dormagen, I rode through to Dusseldorf and then to Duisburg. As I sat in a cafe in Duisburg, I noticed the bridge on my route seemed to be closed. I headed towards it anyway, as we all know that closed doesn't necessarily mean closed to cyclists. Unfortunately, when I arrived on this occasion, closed definitely meant closed.
Listeners, something that is part and parcel of bike adventures is unfortunately flat tyres. This year I've actually been using a tiny e-pump made by Cyclus, and it is fantastic. It's super tiny, like literally fits in the palm of my hand. The device takes 30 minutes to charge up, and it will inflate your tyres between 3 and 5 times depending how much PSI you need to put in them. It's super easy to use, really quick and simple, and has a digital pressure gauge on it as well, so you know exactly how much you've inflated your tyres to. Check them out at Cyclus and use the code STR for a sneaky 5% discount. Support the brands that support the podcast. Now back to the episode.
Which meant a bit of a detour. The rest of the day continued in the same vein, with closed bridges and even the EV15 closed for repair in several places. Eventually, I abandoned my Garmin completely and just relied on Google and dead reckoning to head in the right direction. Germany seemed to go on forever. I assumed that Xanten was in the Netherlands, which it isn't. It is the only town in Germany that begins with the letter X, though. I finally crossed the Rhine again at Emmerich, because the EV15 was closed on the south side of the river, and crossed the border into the Netherlands not long afterwards. I stopped just outside Arnhem to look for a hotel, but there was absolutely nothing available, or at least nothing at a price that I was willing to pay. There was a hotel in a place called Wageningen, about 10 miles further on though, so that's where I ended up, after 116 miles ridden. The hotel restaurant was closed, as there was a wedding reception in progress, so I ordered a pizza and ate in my room before hitting the sack. The next day was supposed to be my final day, and everything seemed to be going to plan, apart from a pretty stiff headwind. The roads were brilliant, of course they were, riding across the dikes and along dedicated cycle paths, but about lunchtime something started to feel not quite right. I felt absolutely drained of all energy, and I could tell something was seriously wrong when I was overtaken by a young lady on rollerblades. As I approached Rotterdam, I suddenly felt the urge to go to the bathroom, and as luck would have it, I wasn't far from a McDonald's. You can say what you like about McDonald's, but they always have a functional bathroom. I made it to the bathroom and I was, let's just say, I had an upset tummy. I stayed in McDonald's a while and had a large drink and an ice cream, but it didn't help. I wasn't going to make it any further. I pulled up booking.com and booked a room in the closest hotel I could find, only a mile or so from Mackey's, and made my way there very slowly. At the check-in, I asked the lady where I could store my bike, and she said there was a meeting room which I could use. She went to the door and helpfully held it open for me, but I couldn't make it. I ducked into the gents in the reception and was violently sick in one of the cubicles. Once I'd stopped vomiting, I went outside and apologised. I finished storing my bike, headed for my room, and was sick again. I'm guessing I'd picked up some kind of food poisoning, or more likely norovirus in Wageningen. I spent the rest of the afternoon and evening being very ill. At some point in the evening, there was a knock at the door, and the lady from reception was outside. Apparently my wife, Jill, had called the hotel and asked if they could check up on me. I'd got into the habit of making a short movie every morning and every evening for social media, as quite a few people were following my progress. I'd also taken Stella's dog tracker with me, and with the lack of progress report, my wife had used the tracker to locate where I was and called the hotel. I assured the lady that I was okay, and no, I didn't think I needed a doctor, but she did offer to bring me a drink. I spent the rest of the night sipping water and Coca-Cola until gradually I managed to keep some of it down. The following morning I felt a lot better, but oh, so weak. Somehow I'd managed to put my ferry back 24 hours and now only had 25 miles to ride, but I think that was the slowest I've ever cycled 25 miles. It took me something like 3 hours. I had been offered breakfast at the hotel, but I just couldn't face anything. I arrived at Hook around 3 p.m, sat on a bench overlooking the ferry terminal, lay down and went to sleep. I must have looked like some kind of vagrant. I woke some time later feeling sunburnt and wandered into Hook for a drink, but I still couldn't face food. When the ferry started boarding a few hours later, I went straight to my cabin and went to bed. I think it was about 5 a.m. I was woken by "Don't Worry, Be Happy" being played over the loudspeaker and an announcement that breakfast was being served. I still couldn't manage breakfast, but I had a shower, got dressed and slowly ate a banana. I rolled down the ramp to Harwich, aiming to get to an Airbnb I'd booked in Leighton Buzzard, about 120 miles away. On any other day, that would have been eminently doable, but not having eaten anything significant for approaching 48 hours, I suppose it was a bit of a tall order. I'd already explained to everybody in a video what had happened, and at one point Anne was threatening to send her husband in the happy bus to come and get me. I envisaged being bundled into a van in some kind of strange kidnapping scenario. I struggled on, and it was okay on the flat, but every time I came to a hill I almost ground to a halt. I think I was near Welling, and I remember it was getting dark, and Jill called me to ask what my plans were. I said, "I'm going to Leighton Buzzard," which was still 25 miles away at that point, probably about 3 hours at the pace I was going. Not long after, Anne called me and said, "I think you should stop," to which I apparently replied that I was okay and I was going to Leighton Buzzard. Jill called me as I was riding through Harpenden, and I finally conceded that I wasn't going to make Leighton Buzzard and I would look for somewhere closer. In the event, I ended up staying in a hotel at Luton Airport after riding 101 miles on a banana and some Lucozade. After a good night's sleep, I felt good enough to attempt some breakfast, which stayed down. Only had something like 90 miles remaining. I was still pretty slow, but as long as I kept turning the pedals, I was pretty sure I'd make it. I at least made it to Leighton Buzzard. I actually stopped in Winslow and had coffee and cake, so things were looking up. As the day progressed, I started to recognise more familiar names, and once I'd reached Stratford-on-Avon, I knew I was nearly home. I think I rolled up outside the kennels about 5 p.m. to a waiting reception committee. Don't think I've ever been so glad to finish a bike ride. We raised about £7,500 during the ride itself, which I was more than happy with. In the event, I covered 1,700 miles in 18 days, which works out about 95 miles a day. So apart from food poisoning, everything went pretty much to plan. After a bit of a rest, I decided to turn the notes from my blog into a book, which I self-published with the intention of donating all the proceeds to Amici Dog Rescue. It's called Going to the Dogs, a bike ride across Europe, and it's available on Amazon. I don't think it's going to solve all of Amici's funding problems, but it can't hurt. The only remaining question now is, what next? Well, I shall be setting off for Tarifa, where I aim to cycle back to the kennels once more. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Steven. Oh my gosh, there are a few things here which I absolutely loved about your adventure. And one of them is just how powerful it is when you just say an idea out loud, when you let it out of the bag, when you tell someone else what you're thinking about, because I feel like that just levels you up on your commitments. And so much of your adventure came from those piece to camera moments on that first charity ride, saying, well, you know, if I can raise this much, I'll head back, and boom, there you were. And then again, finding yourself on a huge adventure from Romania all the way back to the UK. That was amazing. I think that's true for a lot of bike adventurers though, and I've lost count of how many guests I've spoken to who the reason that they have followed through with an adventure is because they said it out loud in the first place. So I love that feeling that just even admitting it to somebody else, even in a casual conversation, can make you head out on some amazing journeys. Another thing which I really appreciated was just how much flexibility you ended up building into your journey. And what I mean by that, Steve, is that even when things didn't go to plan and your route had to change or the days didn't quite match the numbers on paper, and towards the end especially, we had to listen to your body because you were feeling so sick. What was really important there was being able to adapt your plans. When you're sick, sometimes you have no choice, right? But you also had to adapt your route along the way, and I love that you allowed that flexibility in there. Because changing plans shouldn't be something that should be seen as a weakness on your long ride. I think it's actually one of the most important skills that you can have. I also love how honestly you shared this story with us, and the fact that bike travel isn't always taking us to the most glamorous of places. Sometimes the route between point A and point B for the day isn't actually that interesting, and sometimes it's amazing, sometimes you come across stuff you've never thought of before, and sometimes it's a bit same. You might be on the boring stretch of road, or you've got the misadventure of your route not being possible because the road works and the bridges are closed and you've got to find a different solution. Sometimes you're completely wiped out and you're wondering how you're going to get to turn the pedals again the next day. But that's also what makes trips like these meaningful and what sticks out for us when we finish up. I also really liked learning more about these EuroVelo routes. I have been on a couple of them, and I've actually been on sections of the EuroVelo 15, and I have to say it is probably one of the most well-developed routes. And of course, ending off with what's next, you have certainly got the bug, and when I think that you only just came back into bike riding, you did it as a way to reclaim your fitness, you became a super commuter, almost reminds me of another super fan, Isa Murtagh from Scotland there. She also, took up cycling as super commuting, and actually very similar to yourself there, Stephen, is also an Audax rider as well. So I love that becoming a bike commuter has all of a sudden led to you doing Audaxes, to taking on big journeys. And yeah, I don't think this is the last adventure for you. It's certainly lots coming up next, and I love that you sent this in for me. So thank you for inspiring us for this midweek episode. Now, listeners, if you have a story that you would like to share with other fans of the podcast, make sure to get in touch with me. Send me an email, podcast@seektravelride.com, and let me know all about your adventure, and we can see if I can get you into the midweek schedule. Okay, listeners, now it's time for me to do my favourite thing, which is to shout out you, my absolute dead set legends of super fans who have bought me some coffees. Each week these ones come through. It brings a massive smile to my face. And yeah, it keeps the podcast rolling because it goes towards the running costs of the actual show. This week, I am shouting out a previous podcast guest, actually, Em Holbert. You said, thanks for all the amazing content and inspiration you've provided us with, Bella. Well, oh my gosh, Em, I so need to turn it back on you. Firstly, thank you for the coffee. But my gosh, in terms of inspiration, your water cycle tour, it's inspiring so many people. You've inspired other bike tourists to join the challenge and to deliver water filters out there to vulnerable communities all the way around the world to bring clean water to those places. Thank you for being the dead set legend. And then I have Michelle. Michelle, you said, Bella, I want to shout you a virtual coffee and say how much I absolutely love listening to your podcasts. I'm new to the bikepacking scene, a little late to the party at 67 years young. But I've never been shy of seeking out new adventures. I'm currently sitting in hospital, fresh from a half-knee replacement, and I've decided to do something completely wild. I'm going to be taking on the Mawson Trail in South Australia next year. I live in New Zealand, and while I'm not planning the months-long adventures some of your guests take on, this feels like a huge and exciting adventure for me and for my newly upgraded knee. Thank you so much for sharing all these stories. They've inspired me, entertained me, and definitely helped distract me from hospital food. Thanks again, Michelle. Michelle, I cannot put into words how uplifting receiving this message from you was. Thanks for buying me some coffees, but oh my gosh, I am so excited for you and what's to come on the Mawson Trail. Please promise me you're going to keep me updated on how that adventure goes, and maybe we can share your story on the podcast as well. I love that you're new to bikepacking and that you're taking these amazing adventures on. And I hope that while you're training for it there in New Zealand, that it's taking you to some epic landscapes as well. Now, listeners, if you want to be like Em Holbert and Michelle and show your appreciation for the podcast, simply head to buymeacoffee.com/Seek Travel Ride. Buy me some virtual coffees, but more importantly, let me know what is it that you love about the podcast and where is your next bike adventure going to take you. Until the next episode, my name's Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.